crash at Daytona. On February 18, 2001, Dale Earnhardt rolled onto the asphalt at Daytona International Speedway for the 43rd running of the Daytona 500. He was 49 years old, a 7-time Winston Cup champion, and the most recognizable driver in American motorsport. His number 3 black Chevrolet Monte Carlo was the most photographed car in NASCAR. The crowd that filled the speedway that afternoon was approximately 150,000 spectators. The broadcast was carried live on Fox, the network's first race under a newly signed television contract worth billions of dollars. The conditions were warm and clear. Earnhardt had qualified outside the front row, but had spent the afternoon working through traffic with the patience he was known for. His team, Dale Earnhardt Incorporated, also fielded the cars of Michael Waltrip and his son Dale Earnhardt Jr. As the race entered its final stages, Waltrip held the lead, with Earnhardt Jr. running second. Earnhardt himself ran third, in a position to defend his teammates from the cars chasing them. For most of the final lap, Earnhardt was doing exactly that. He blocked challenges from drivers including Sterling Marlin and Ken Schrader. The cars behind him were drafting at speeds approaching 190 miles per hour. The lap was the kind of high-speed traffic Earnhardt had handled thousands of times across his career. The crash began in turn 4. Earnhardt's car made contact with Sterling Marlin's car in the left rear. The contact was light. To anyone watching, it looked routine. The car turned slightly down the track, then turned back up. The angle changed. The car shot up the banking toward the outside wall. Ken Schrader's car was alongside him as the angle developed. Schrader's car struck Earnhardt's car on the passenger side just before impact. The two cars then traveled together up the banking. They struck the concrete retaining wall at the top of turn 4 at an angle calculated by investigators to be roughly between 55 and 59 degrees. The impact speed was estimated at approximately 160 miles per hour. The cars slid down the banking and into the infield grass. Schrader's car came to rest first. The number 3 car came to rest with its nose still pointed up the track. The broadcast cut to coverage of Michael Waltrip taking the checkered flag. The celebration on pit road began. Cameras showed Waltrip embracing his crew. The crash in turn 4 for the first several seconds looked like one of the dozens of crashes the sport produced in any given season. Ken Schrader climbed from his car and walked to Earnhardt's window. What he saw inside changed his demeanor immediately. He waved urgently for safety crews. Schrader would later say only that he knew what he saw and that he would not describe it publicly. The safety crew arrived within seconds. The roof was cut away. Earnhardt was extricated from the car. He was placed in an ambulance and transported to Halifax Medical Center, a short distance from the speedway. CPR was administered en route. Emergency physicians worked on him in the trauma bay. At 5:16 p.m. local time, Dale Earnhardt was pronounced dead. The cause of death was determined to be a basilar skull fracture. The injury occurs when the base of the skull separates from the spine, typically as a result of rapid deceleration. It was the same injury that had killed several other drivers in NASCAR's Premier Series in the months preceding his death. In the weeks that followed, NASCAR mandated the use of the HANDS device, a head and neck restraint system, for all drivers in its top 3 national series. The number 3 car was retired from full-time competition. Horn Strike, Wyoming. On July 30th, 1989, Lane Frost walked into the chutes at Cheyenne Frontier Days. He was 25 years old, the 1987 Professional Rodeo Cowboys Association World Champion bull rider, and one of the most popular cowboys in the sport. The event he was competing in was nicknamed the Daddy of 'em All, the oldest and largest outdoor rodeo in the world. The grounds in Cheyenne, Wyoming filled every summer with tens of thousands of spectators across the run of the festival. Frost had drawn a Brahma bull named Taken Care of Business, owned by Bad Company Rodeo. He was known on the circuit as a strong spinner with significant horn presence. The weather that afternoon had turned. Rain had fallen earlier. The arena dirt was wet and heavy. The conditions added an additional layer of difficulty to a sport already considered the most dangerous in professional rodeo. The crowd in the grandstands was at full capacity. Frost's father was in attendance, along with several of his closest friends on the tour, including fellow bull rider Tuff Hedeman and steer wrestler Cody Lambert. The event was being filmed for later broadcast on cable television, a common arrangement for major rodeos of the era. Frost climbed onto the bull in the chute. He wrapped his hand into the bull rope. He nodded for the gate. The chute opened. The ride was clean. Frost rode the full 8 seconds. The buzzer sounded. He had successfully covered the bull with an 85-point ride. He swung his leg over and dismounted on the right side, landing in the arena dirt. He took a step away from the animal. The bull turned. Taking care of business, pivoted in the mud and lowered his head. The right horn drove into Frost's left side. The strike was a single motion. The bull continued past him toward the catch pen. Frost rose to his feet. He took several steps away from where the bull had struck him. He turned and looked toward the chutes. He raised an arm. He signaled to Tough Hedeman that something was wrong. Then he fell forward into the dirt. Hedeman and Lambert vaulted the fence. The arena medical staff arrived within seconds. The first responders rolled Frost onto his back. They began administering aid. The injury was not externally severe. There was no significant visible wound. The horn had driven inward, breaking ribs and severing a major artery. Frost was transported by ambulance to Memorial Hospital of Laramie County. The medical team attempted to stabilize him on the way to the hospital. Internal bleeding from the severed artery could not be controlled. The injuries were severe and the response window was too short. He was pronounced dead at the hospital. The funeral was held at the First Baptist Church in Atoka, Oklahoma. Approximately 3,500 people attended. His coffin was carried by working cowboys from the tour. He was buried at Mount Olivet Cemetery in Hugo, Oklahoma, near the grave of Freckles Brown, the bull rider who had been his childhood hero. In the years following his death, protective vests became increasingly common in bull riding. The Professional Bull Riders organization, founded by riders Frost had competed alongside, made the vests standard required equipment. The vests were not designed to prevent the specific injury that killed Frost. They were designed to address the same general category of horn strike. His death is widely cited as the moment that brought safety equipment debates into mainstream rodeo. His life was later adapted into the 1994 film 8 Seconds, with the role played by Luke Perry. Tough Hedeman, who had jumped the fence to him in the arena, was a consultant on the production. Boxing ring tragedy. On November 13, 1982, Duk Koo Kim entered the ring at Caesars Palace in Las Vegas to fight Ray Mancini for the World Boxing Association lightweight title. Kim was 23 years old. He had traveled from South Korea for the fight, his first world title shot. Mancini was the defending champion, a popular American fighter known as Boom Boom. The bout was broadcast live on CBS as part of the network's Saturday afternoon sports programming. The fight was held in an outdoor arena at Caesars Palace under temporary lighting. The crowd numbered approximately 6,500. Howard Cosell was at ringside as part of the broadcast team for an earlier portion of the network's coverage. The pre-fight atmosphere was electric. Kim had arrived in the United States 2 weeks before the bout. Reports later surfaced that he had struggled to make weight in the days leading up to the fight. The opening rounds were ferocious. Kim came forward consistently. He absorbed Mancini's punches and answered with combinations of his own. By the middle rounds, both fighters were marked. The pace did not slow. Kim's corner kept him on the stool between rounds, working on swelling around his eyes. By round 11, the fight had become a sustained exchange of head punches. Both fighters were visibly exhausted. The referee was Richard Green. Green had been observing the punishment being absorbed. In the 10th round, a point was deducted from Kim for holding and hitting. Kim returned to the center of the ring for each round and continued to come forward. Round 14 was the final round of sustained combat. Mancini charged forward and connected with a right hand. Kim fell to the canvas. He pulled himself up using the ropes. The referee waved off the fight 19 seconds into the round. Mancini was declared the winner by knockout. Then Kim collapsed. Cornermen attempted to revive him. A doctor entered the ring. Kim was placed on a stretcher and carried from the ring. He was transported to Desert Springs Hospital. Emergency neurosurgery began within minutes of his arrival. Surgeons performed a 2.5-hour operation to remove a subdural hematoma, a blood clot pressing on the brain. Kim was placed on life support. The blood loss and brain swelling had progressed beyond what surgery could address. He remained in a coma for 5 days. Family members traveled from South Korea to the hospital. On November 18, 1982, Duk Koo Kim was pronounced dead. The cause of death was the subdural hematoma sustained during the fight. The aftermath of the bout reshaped professional boxing. The World Boxing Council reduced championship fights from 15 rounds to 12. The other major sanctioning bodies followed within the next several years. Medical protocols at ringside were strengthened across the major commissions. Pre-fight neurological examinations became more rigorous. The fight also produced 2 further deaths in the months that followed. Kim's mother died by self-unalived several months after her son's funeral. Referee Richard Green died by self-unalived in July of 1983. Both deaths were widely attributed in the boxing press to the psychological aftermath of the bout. Ray Mancini continued to fight. He spoke publicly about Kim's death across the decades that followed. He met with Kim's son, who had been born after his father's death, in a documentary released in 2013. The fight is one of the most cited in modern boxing reform literature. It is referenced in nearly every academic and medical paper concerning long-form professional boxing safety, published since the early 1980s. Crash at Imola. On May 1st, 1994, Ayrton Senna prepared to start the San Marino Grand Prix at the Autodromo Enzo Edino Ferrari in Imola, Italy. He was 34 years old, a three-time Formula One world champion, and one of the most decorated racing drivers in the history of the sport. He was driving for Williams that season, the team that had dominated the previous several championships. The race was broadcast live across more than 200 countries. The weekend leading up to the race had already been calamitous. On Friday during practice, the Brazilian driver Rubens Barrichello had suffered a heavy crash that left him hospitalized. On Saturday, during qualifying, the Austrian driver Roland Ratzenberger had crashed at the Villeneuve corner and been killed. He was the first Formula One driver to die at a Grand Prix weekend in 12 years. Senna had walked the Ratzenberger crash site that Saturday afternoon. He had spoken at length with the head of the FIA medical team, Sid Watkins. Watkins later wrote that he had urged Senna to retire from the sport that weekend. Senna had declined. He told Watkins he could not stop. Race morning brought another incident before the start. At the start, the Finnish driver J.J. Lehto stalled on the grid. Pedro Lamy, approaching from the back, did not see Lehto's car and struck it at high speed. Debris flew into the crowd. Several spectators were injured. The race began behind the safety car. The safety car pulled in at the end of lap 5. Senna led from pole position. Behind him, Michael Schumacher was running second in a Benetton. The two cars accelerated through lap 6 and into lap 7. At Tamburello on lap 7, Senna's Williams left the racing line. The car traveled in a straight line off the outside of the corner. Telemetry showed Senna braked hard and downshifted twice before impact. The car entered the corner at approximately 192 miles per hour and struck the concrete retaining wall at approximately 131 miles per hour. The car rebounded back onto the track and came to rest on the grass. The front right wheel and suspension assembly tore off on impact. A piece of suspension attached to the wheel and a piece of the upright assembly penetrated the visor of Senna's helmet. Sid Watkins arrived at the scene within seconds. The medical car had been following the field. Watkins assessed Senna in the cockpit. He performed an emergency tracheotomy at the site. Senna was extracted from the car and transferred to a helicopter. He was airlifted to Maggiore Hospital in Bologna. Senna was pronounced dead at 6:40 p.m. local time. The cause of death was massive head trauma. A small Austrian flag was found rolled up in the car. He had intended to raise it at the finish in honor of Ratzenberger. The investigation by Italian authorities lasted years. Charges were filed against members of the Williams team. The mechanical cause of the steering failure remained disputed in court proceedings that continued into the next decade. No convictions resulted. The death of Senna prompted the most comprehensive safety overhaul in the history of Formula One. The Grand Prix Drivers Association was reformed. Cockpit protection regulations were rewritten. Circuits across the championship calendar were modified, including the removal of the corner where Senna died from the layout entirely. Crash testing standards for the cars were tightened year after year for the next 2 decades. No Formula One driver died at a Grand Prix weekend for 20 years after that May afternoon at Imola. Luge track death. On February 12, 2010, Nodar Kumaritashvili climbed onto his sled at the top of the Whistler Sliding Center for a training run. He was 21 years old. He was a luger from the country of Georgia. It was the morning of the opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics. His event was scheduled to begin the following day. The Whistler Sliding Center was the fastest track ever built for Olympic luge competition. Speeds on the track had exceeded 95 miles per hour during testing. Several athletes from multiple national teams had crashed during training sessions in the days leading up to the games. The athletes had expressed concern publicly about the speeds the track produced. Organizers had defended the design as within safety parameters. Kumaritashvili was not a contender for a medal. He had finished 44th in his most recent World Cup standings. He was a developmental athlete from a small national federation. His father had also competed in the luge for Georgia. His uncle was the president of the Georgian Luge Federation. He took the start at the top of the track. It was his final official training run before competition. He pulled himself onto the runners and tucked his head down. The sled accelerated through the early portion of the course. The Whistler track had 16 curves. The fastest sections were near the bottom. The exit of curve 16 led directly into the finish stretch. Kumaritashvili entered curve 16 at a speed measured by track timing systems at approximately 89 miles per hour. He lost control on the exit of the curve. The sled hit the inside wall. His body was lifted from the sled and thrown across the track. He cleared the outer wall of the track entirely. He struck a steel support pole that held part of the track's roof structure. The pole was unpadded. Track workers reached him within seconds. CPR and mouth-to-mouth resuscitation were administered at the site. He was airlifted to the Whistler Healthcare Center. Resuscitation efforts continued during transport. The injuries from the impact with the steel pole were not survivable. The blunt force trauma was extensive. He was pronounced dead at the hospital shortly after arrival. The opening ceremony for the Vancouver Winter Olympics took place that evening as scheduled. The Georgian delegation entered the stadium wearing black armbands. They received a sustained ovation. A moment of silence was observed for Kumaritashvili during the ceremony. The investigation into the death was conducted jointly by the International Luge Federation, the Vancouver Organizing Committee, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The Federation's initial report attributed the crash to athlete error. The Kumaritashvili family disputed the conclusion. They argued the track design and the unpadded pole were the primary cause of death. Modifications to the track were made before competition began the following day. The walls at Curve 16 were raised. Padding was installed on the steel structural elements. The men's competition was moved to a lower start position, reducing top speed significantly. The women's start was moved to the men's previous position. The footage of the crash was broadcast briefly on news outlets around the world before being widely pulled from circulation. The International Olympic Committee requested networks restrict use of the video. It remains one of the most heavily restricted pieces of Olympic broadcast footage in the history of the Games. Wrestling rigging fall. On May 23, 1999, Owen Hart prepared to make his entrance at the Over the Edge pay-per-view event at Kemper Arena in Kansas City, Missouri. He was 34 years old. He was a second-generation professional wrestler from the Hart wrestling family of Calgary. He was performing under the masked superhero character known as the Blue Blazer. His match that night was an Intercontinental Championship bout against the Godfather. The event was broadcast live on pay-per-view television to an audience of over 200,000 purchasing households. The arena was sold out. The Blue Blazer entrance had been promoted as a special effect. Hart was to descend from the rafters above the ring on a harness, mimicking a superhero entrance. He had performed a similar descent during a previous Blue Blazer appearance. The stunt was a known element of the character. The harness was a quick-release model. The mechanism was designed to allow the wrestler to disconnect from the rigging once close to the ring. The character was a comedy figure who was supposed to attempt the heroic entrance and bungle it, providing comic effect. The release was intended to be a controlled detachment during a prearranged stunt. Hart was suited up in the rafters of the arena approximately 78 feet above the ring. The pay-per-view broadcast had cut to a pre-taped backstage interview segment to allow the rigging team time to position him for the descent. The live audience inside the arena could see the rafters. The home audience could not. The release mechanism activated prematurely. Hart fell from the rigging. He landed chest first on the top rope of the ring. His body then fell into the ring itself. The live audience initially believed the fall was part of the performance. Within seconds, the reaction inside the arena changed. The referee in the ring called for medical staff. Paramedics on standby at the event entered the ring. CPR was administered. The broadcast did not show the fall or the resuscitation efforts. Commentator Jim Ross informed the home audience that the situation was not part of the show and was a real medical emergency. Hart was extracted from the ring on a stretcher. He was transported to Truman Medical Center in Kansas City. Emergency physicians attempted resuscitation. The internal injuries from the fall were extensive. The impact had severed his aorta. The blunt force trauma was severe. He was pronounced dead at the hospital shortly after arrival. The pay-per-view event continued. Subsequent matches proceeded as scheduled. The decision to continue the broadcast was made by company management during the broadcast itself and would become a focal point of public criticism in the weeks and years that followed. The lawsuit filed by Hart's widow, Martha Hart, named the World Wrestling Federation, the company that manufactured the harness, and the rigging contractor. The case was settled in 2000 for an amount publicly reported at approximately $18 million. The settlement was distributed across multiple defendants. The rigging equipment used in the stunt was examined by investigators. The release mechanism was found to have activated under significantly less force than required for normal use. The exact cause of the premature activation was disputed across the litigation. The company that manufactured the release was later named in a separate lawsuit. The Blue Blazer character was retired permanently from the company's programming. Aerial stunts using descent rigging were sharply curtailed across professional wrestling productions in North America for years afterward. The Hart family pursued legal action separately. Martha Hart later founded the Owen Hart Foundation, which has operated since 2000 to provide scholarships and housing assistance. Cricket ball impact. On November 25, 2014, Phillip Hughes walked to the crease at the Sydney Cricket Ground. He was 25 years old. He was a left-handed batsman for South Australia in the Sheffield Shield, the premier domestic first-class cricket competition in Australia. He had represented Australia in 26 test matches. He was widely expected to be recalled to the national team for the upcoming series against India. The Sheffield Shield match was between South Australia and New South Wales. The conditions were warm and clear. The pitch had been described as offering some assistance to fast bowlers. The crowd in attendance was small, typical of domestic first-class cricket on a weekday. Hughes had reached 63 runs not out before the incident. He had resumed batting after the lunch interval. The bowler facing Hughes after lunch was Sean Abbott. Abbott was 22 years old, an emerging fast bowler in the New South Wales squad. He had bowled a series of short pitch deliveries to Hughes in the preceding overs. The tactic of bowling short to Hughes was well established across professional cricket. Hughes had been working through the spell with caution. Abbott delivered a short-pitched ball. The delivery rose to head height as it reached Hughes. He attempted a hook shot. The shot is a standard response to a short delivery. He had played the shot thousands of times across his career. The ball struck him below the left ear, in the area at the base of the skull where the neck meets the back of the head. The area was not covered by his helmet. Hughes remained on his feet for a moment. He swayed. He took a step. Then he collapsed forward onto the pitch. He fell face down. Players from both sides ran to him. The on-field umpires moved immediately. The team physician for New South Wales, Dr. John Orchard, was on the ground within seconds. Mouth-to-mouth resuscitation was administered on the field. An ambulance was called. The ball had caused a vertebral artery dissection, a tear in one of the arteries supplying blood to the brain. The dissection had caused a subarachnoid hemorrhage. Hughes was loaded into an ambulance and transported to St. Vincent's Hospital in Sydney. The transport was expedited under police escort. He arrived at the hospital and was taken directly to surgery. Surgeons placed him in a medically induced coma. The bleeding into the brain was extensive. The damage was severe. He remained in the coma for 2 days. Family members and teammates gathered at the hospital. On November 27, 2014, Phillip Hughes was pronounced dead. The cause of death was the vertebral artery dissection caused by the impact of the ball. His funeral was held in his hometown of Maxville, in northern New South Wales. Tens of thousands of people lined the streets. The service was broadcast live across Australia. Players from the Australian national team served as pallbearers. The first test against India, which had been scheduled to begin shortly after his death, was postponed. When it eventually went ahead, players from both sides wore black armbands. Hughes was named the 13th man, and his test cap number 408 was painted on the field and sewn under the badges of all Australian players. His teammate David Warner cited the number throughout the remainder of his international career. The international cricket community reviewed helmet design standards following the death. The British Standards Institution updated its helmet certification to require additional protection at the back and sides of the head. Manufacturers introduced clip-on neck protectors to existing helmet designs. The neck protectors became increasingly common in professional matches over the following years. Sean Abbott continued to play professional cricket and was eventually selected for the Australian national side. NASCAR pit tragedy. On November 18, 1990, Mike Rich was working the right rear tire position on Bill Elliott's pit crew at Atlanta Motor Speedway. He was 32 years old. He was a married father. He had been a pit crew member for several years and had joined the Melling racing team in the late 1980s. The event was the Atlanta Journal 500, the final race of the NASCAR Winston Cup season. The broadcast was carried live on ESPN. The Atlanta Motor Speedway pit road that year was configured as a narrow lane, with cars entering and exiting at high speeds. There were no enforced pit road speed limits at the time. Drivers were expected to slow as they entered their stalls. There was no specific limit on how fast a car could travel between the entry of pit road and the stall itself. The arrangement had produced incidents in previous seasons, but had not produced a fatality. The race was on lap 300 of 328. A caution flag had brought the field down for pit stops. Bill Elliott pulled his car into his stall on pit road. The crew assembled around the car. Rich was in position at the right rear. 2 front and rear tire changers were working. A jackman was raising the car. A fueler was filling the tank from the wall side of the stall. Ricky Rudd's car entered pit road at the same time. As Rudd approached his own pit stall, located in front of Elliott's, the brakes on his Chevrolet locked up. The car spun out of control. There was no available evasive route. Rudd's car slid the length of pit road and struck Elliott's car directly on the right side. Rich was working at the right rear of the car at the moment of impact. He was crushed between the 2 vehicles. The jackman, Tommy Cole, and other crew members were also struck. They sustained injuries but survived. The broadcast cameras captured the impact. Pit road was crowded with crew members, network technicians, and officials. Emergency response personnel reached the scene within seconds. Rich was extracted from between the cars. Resuscitation efforts began on pit road. He was transported by helicopter to Georgia Baptist Medical Center in Atlanta. Emergency physicians attempted resuscitation in the operating room. The internal injuries from the crushing impact were extensive. The blunt force trauma was severe. He was pronounced dead at the hospital at approximately 8 p.m. that evening. The cause of death was cardiac arrest brought on by his injuries. Tommy Cole and other injured crew members were treated and eventually recovered. NASCAR's response to the death was immediate. The sanctioning body announced before the following season that pit road speed limits would be introduced for the first time in the series' history. The limit was set in conjunction with the layout of each individual track. Drivers exceeding the posted limit during a pit stop sequence would receive a penalty. The rule has remained in force across NASCAR's National Series ever since. The pit stalls themselves were also modified at most tracks in the seasons following the death. Concrete barriers were installed in some configurations. The arrangement of pit road entry and exit was redesigned at several venues. The wall separating pit road from the racing surface was strengthened at most facilities on the circuit. Bill Elliott spoke publicly about the death of his crew member in the weeks following the incident. The team continued to compete. Ricky Rudd, whose car had suffered the brake failure, was not found at fault by NASCAR officials. The brake failure was determined to be a mechanical issue beyond the driver's control. He continued to compete in the series for many years afterward. Cycling descent crash. On May 9, 2011, Wouter Weylandt rolled out of the starting town of Reggio Emilia for Stage 3 of the Giro d'Italia. He was 26 years old. He was a Belgian professional cyclist riding for the Leopard Trek team. He had won a stage of the Giro the previous year. He was considered one of the most promising sprinters in his generation. The stage was 173 kilometers long, finishing in Rapallo on the Ligurian coast. The stage included one categorized climb, the Passo del Bocco, with a descent on the far side leading toward the finish. The descent was technical. It included tight corners and exposed sections with low retaining walls. The road surface was narrow in places. The race was broadcast live across Europe on the Italian state broadcaster, RAI, and other national networks. Weylandt was riding within the main group of the peloton during the climb. He was a sprinter, not a climber, and was unlikely to feature in the final selection at the top. His job for the day was to conserve energy and assist his team leader. By the descent of the Passo del Bocco, he was working his way back through the group after dropping off the pace slightly on the climb. The race was approximately 17 kilometers from the finish line. The peloton was descending at speeds approaching 50 miles per hour. Weylandt was riding on the left side of the road. He looked back over his left shoulder, a movement riders commonly make to check the position of teammates or rivals behind them. As he looked back, his bicycle drifted to the left. His left pedal or the left side of his handlebar struck the low concrete guardrail that ran along the edge of the road. The impact threw him from the bicycle. He was launched across the road. He struck the ground on the right side of the road, face first. Race doctors reached him within seconds. The race medical team had been following the peloton in cars. They arrived at the site of the crash and began emergency response on the road. CPR was administered. The work continued for approximately 40 minutes. Weylandt's facial and head injuries from the impact were extensive. The trauma was severe. The medical team continued resuscitation efforts even after it had become clear the injuries were beyond what could be addressed at the roadside. A helicopter was called. The decision was eventually made to halt resuscitation. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The race continued to the finish that afternoon. News of the death reached the team cars and the broadcast booths during the closing kilometers of the stage. The Italian commentators on RA suspended normal coverage. The presentation ceremonies after the stage were canceled. The following day's stage was neutralized. The peloton rode together at a slow pace from start to finish. There were no attacks. There was no contest for the stage win. Weylandt's Leopard Trek team rode at the front of the group for the final kilometers. His teammates crossed the finish line first, with the bunch behind them. Weylandt's training partner at the race, the American rider Tyler Farrar, abandoned the Giro after the neutralized stage. The race jersey number Weylandt had worn, number 108, was retired by the Giro d'Italia organizers for the remainder of the race. Subsequent editions of the Giro have not used the number. The Belgian Cycling Federation and the International Cycling Union, the UCI, conducted reviews of the descent and of barriers on Grand Tour courses. Changes to course safety planning at the major races followed in the years afterward. Weylandt's funeral was held in Ghent. Approximately 2,000 people attended, including many professional cyclists. His longtime partner gave birth to their daughter several months after his death. The child had been due in September of that that year. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now.